that we learned about the different taxa of living things, we're going to look at the kingdoms. So remember, he is an African gray parrot, so that's his common species name. His scientific name is Psittacus erythicus. Just like us, we have our common name's human, and our scientific name is Homo sapiens sapien. So every living thing has a scientific name once it's been identified. Most living things also have a common name. So Brutus here is an African gray parrot. He is in the domain Eukarya, which are the eukaryotes. Means they have cells with a nucleus. He's an animal, so he's kingdom Animalia. He's a chordate. These are animals that have a backbone, so he's in phylum Chordata. He is in class Aves because he's a bird. Okay, so this is where we differentiate. So humans would not be in class Aves, right? We're in class Mammalia, or mammals. The order is Psittaformes. So formes suffix is often used in orders. The family is Psittidae, and DAE is often the suffix used in families. His genus is Psittacus, and his species is Psittacus erythicus. So this is the classification of living things. We're going from, it's kind of the hierarchy of taxonomy. So taxonomy is the classification of life, right? And when we look at scientific names, species scientific names, they're made of two words. So binomial nomenclature. This is a two-word naming system. So it's a two-word naming system for all living things. And here's an example of those two words. Brutus, Psittacus erythicus. When you use scientific names, or scientific names for a species, there are a few rules that apply. They are proper names, so they are written in italics, and if you're handwriting it, you underline the words. The first word is always capitalized, the second word is not capitalized. And they're always two words. There are three domains of life. One of them is Eukarya, and that is, these are living things that have cells with a nucleus. Then there are two domains that are used to classify prokaryotes, which are really bacteria. Three domains of life. First one we talked about is eukarya. Eukaryotes are living things that have cells with nucleus. Domain are the archaebacteria. So prefix archae, archaic, ancient. Archaea, these are the first living things that evolved on Earth. So these are ancient bacteria. Are extremists. So they're bacteria that can live in locations other things cannot. So areas where it's very hot. Third type of domain is the bacteria. And these are really the true bacteria. So these are the bacteria, so like pneumococcus, streptococcus, staphylococcus. These are types of bacteria. Interesting, we have three domains of living things. And two of the domains are actually bacteria. So two of the domains are actually prokaryotes. And remember, prokaryote does not have a true nucleus. So these two are bacteria. Eukarya are eukaryotes, where they have actually a nucleus. Okay, so now we're going to look at just the eukaryotes, right? So the domain Eukarya. And there are 6 kingdoms. So now we're going to look at the kingdoms of life. We've looked at the domains. Remember, the domains are the most general. It's the largest taxonomic group, or the largest taxa. And there are 3 of them. We have Eukarya, Archaea, and the bacteria. Now we're going to look at the kingdoms. And there are 6 kingdoms of living things, 6 of them. First kingdom we're going to look at are the plants. Now sometimes these kingdoms are written in Latin, so it would say the kingdom Plantae. All right, but we're just going to call it plants. Plants are many-celled. Okay, they don't just have one cell, so they're multicellular versus unicellular. Unicellular would be one cell. These are multicellular. Woo! Prefix multi means many. Okay, if it's uni, prefix means one. Okay, so these are multicellular. Auto means self. If we look at trophic levels, we're going to talk about when we get to ecology, is feeding. So in other words, they can feed themselves because they use the process of photosynthesis. Autotrophs are living things that can make their own food. They're self-feeding. They get the energy from the sun, right? And then they convert that energy to chemical energy in the form of glucose. So these perform photosynthesis. Are a lot of bacteria that can perform photosynthesis as well. So performing photosynthesis is not something only plants can do. Most of the oxygen really in our atmosphere comes from photosynthetic bacteria. So bacteria that can produce glucose, that perform photosynthesis. They reproduce in many ways, so they're sexually and asexually. They basically can be cloned. So if you've ever, what makes plants different than the other kingdoms is they perform photosynthesis and they're multicellular autotrophs. Okay. Just to review, remember photosynthesis, using the sunlight, right? Here is the reaction for photosynthesis. You should know this, you must know this. We're starting with carbon dioxide and water. Okay, 6 carbon dioxide, 6 water. Using the sunlight, glucose is produced. So this is energy, chemical energy. C6H12O6, that's sugar, glucose, plus 6 oxygen. So this is, glucose is the food that plants make. This is why they're called autotrophs, because they can do this process. The next kingdom are the animals. Animals, we can also say this is kingdom Animalia. So if you study animals, the study of animals is called zoology. Zoo, prefix, animals, ology, study of. And it's not zoology, it's zoology. Okay, so animals are multicellular. We cannot make our own food. We have to get food by eating another animal or another plant. So multicellular heterotrophs. Heterotrophs, this is feeding. Hetero is different feeding. So we have to get food from different things, like other animals or other plants. So that's why we're called heterotrophs. Organism is a living thing, one living thing, an organism. This kingdom is really divided into a couple categories, and they are based on the presence of a backbone. So, a chordate is the phylum Chordata, contains the animals with backbones. But most of the animals on Earth actually do not have a backbone. They're invertebrates. So vertebrates have a vertebral column. So they have a backbone. Invertebrates do not. Actually, most of the animals on Earth are invertebrates. And in fact, and most of those are insects. So insects are animals. Right? They're in the class Insecta, which is in the animal kingdom. But they don't have a backbone. Their skeleton is actually on the outside, which is awesome. So they have an exoskeleton. It's on the outside, exterior skeleton, exoskeleton. They don't have an internal skeleton, so they don't have a backbone. Sponges are actually animals. Now if you have a natural sponge in your shower, you take a bath with a natural sponge, you're not in there alone. There's another animal in there with you if it's a real sponge. actually dead, all right, but it's like the corpse of an animal. Because if it's a real sponge, obviously there's a lot of synthetic sponges, but if you get the real sponge, that is actually, at one time, that was alive. It's an animal. All right. The next kingdom are funguses. Woo! All right. Fungi is the plural form. Fungus means one, fungi many. These can be one cell or many cells, so they can be unicellular or multicellular. Do not perform photosynthesis. So a fungus is not a plant. No photosynthesis, so they are heterotrophs. Basically grow on whatever they eat. So, you know, I mean, everybody's seen like a mold or old pizza that you have in the refrigerator, and it's covered in like that green mold. It's a fungus. Yeast, which is used for baking bread. Beer industry, wine depends on yeast. So yeast is actually a fungus. Fungi, they have actually cell walls, which is similar to a plant. Fungi have cell walls, like plants, but they are not plants because they are heterotrophs, and they cannot make their own food. Whereas plants are autotrophs. Remember, they can perform photosynthesis and make their own food. Also, the cell walls are different. So the cell walls of plants are mainly made of the sugar cellulose. And this is very, very hard to digest. So if you eat a lot of like celery, it's very hard to chew, first of all, and a lot of it is not absorbed because it's very hard to digest. But fungus, or fungi, which is the plural of fungus, they have a different chemical in their cell walls. And it's a polysaccharide, which means it's a large sugar, and it's called chitin. And it's actually the same thing that the exoskeletons of insects. So remember, exoskeleton is a skeleton on the outside of the body. Endoskeleton would be like our skeletons on the inside of our body. But insects have an exoskeleton. Their skeleton's actually on the outside. That's why they're hard on the outside. But their exoskeleton and the cell walls of fungi are made of a polysaccharide called chitin. Poly means many, and saccharide is sugar. Cell walls of fungi and the exoskeletons of insects. So they do have some characteristics of plants, but they cannot perform photosynthesis, so they are not plants. Mushrooms on my pizza, man, they're so good. Woo. You don't want to eat, there are different types of mushrooms, lots of different species, some of them obviously poisonous. These are fungi. Fourth group are the protists. Take samples from lakes, ponds, and we look for protists. And protists, they can be, most of them are actually unicellular. There are some that are not, though. Very diverse group, because some of them can perform photosynthesis, some cannot. So some are autotrophs, some are heterotrophs. Or like amoeba, amoeba, their brain is actually eating the brain. But amoeba, algae is not a plant. So algae, you see in a pond, sometimes you see like a film of green. It's like an algae. It's an autotroph. So they do perform photosynthesis. Kingdoms are bacteria again. Woo! Archaeobacteria. So these, just like this is in the domain Archaea, kingdom Archaeobacteria. So these are bacteria that really are the first things that evolved on Earth. These are ancient bacteria that live in extreme environments. So these are the extremists. The last kingdom is eubacteria. So eubacteria is really true bacteria. So these would be in the domain bacteria, but the kingdom would be eubacteria. So these are bacteria, like I talked about, Staphylococcus, Streptococcus, pneumococcus, that causes pneumonia. These are true bacteria. They can be found everywhere. All right, they are everywhere. You can't escape bacteria. You cannot. There's no way. And in fact, there's actually more eubacteria in your mouth than there are humans on Earth. So you thought that was funny. But most of them are harmless, obviously. And we really depend on bacteria, especially like in your gut, to help in the digestive process. And this is why when you take antibiotics a lot, like if you get sick, they give you antibiotics. If you have a bacterial infection, antibiotics, they kill bacteria, but they also kill your own cells. They can kill some of your own cells, but when they kill the bacteria, they also kill the bacteria in your gut, so in your intestine, and then it causes digestive problems. So this is why sometimes they'll prescribe or suggest take a probiotic, which contains bacteria. So I take a probiotic every day, which is really, it's a pill with bacteria in it. They're both unicellular, because they're one cell. Some bacteria can perform photosynthesis. Are autotrophs, some are heterotrophs. The most common living thing on planet Earth is bacteria. And you can see of the 6 kingdoms of life, 2 of them are bacteria. And if you think about domains of life, 2 of the 3 domains are bacteria. So bacteria is everywhere. Cells are very, very small in comparison to our cells. But the number of cells, if we were to count the numbers, our body, we would actually be outnumbered by bacteria. More bacteria cells in your body than there are human cells. It's just they're very, very, very small. So they don't really weigh that much. So if you were to weigh yourself, about 5 pounds of you is really bacteria. But if you're to count the number of cells, the number of bacterial cells far outnumber our own cells. It's just they're very, very small. But bacteria are everywhere. You cannot escape bacteria.